Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our 2021 webinar series on international models and emergency management with the International Emergency Management Society and Capacity Building International. And today we are going to talk about Norway and talk about Norway's models and how they manage crisis. Now, I'll, of course, go over a few administrative issues before we get started, as always. So just to let you know and sort of recap of what we've done so far is the fact that we've had 17 of 24 events this year so far, including 1,326 attendees from 66 nations. So we've got some really good reach with everybody into the community, and very much appreciate your attendance and continued support throughout the webinar series this year. And we are still going further. But for this specific webinar, so just a few quick points is that, of course, let us know where you're joining from so we can continue to see where our audience is from and where everybody's joining us from, and as far as the international community. And then, of course, use that Q&A feature as we go through the presentation, because that's really how we capture the questions is later on for a report, so that we can make sure that we've actually answered all the questions that you may have, even if that's after the webinar itself. And of course, we had the LinkedIn event information. So if you want to, if you're not currently there, you want to join the LinkedIn event, that's where we host all sort of the information. We put the announcements and everything else inside that event itself. And go ahead and follow, if you haven't done already, CBI, Teams, and ISG on social media to stay updated with current events. And future webinars. So what's coming up? We've had 17 to 24 events, and here's what's happening for the next few events that are on the radar as far as coming up in the next September, October timeframe. We're going to continue with our partnership with the University of Manchester in our Manchester series. Number 2, we've had one event so far out of 3. Then the series number 2 is going to be about COVID recovery and what that might look like for societies. And then, of course, University of Manchester series number 3 in our partnership is going to be on the future of emergency management. Now, both of these events are going to be in a little bit different format. They're going to be panel discussions. We're going to have 4 panelists, and it'll be moderated by the University of Manchester, Harold, and myself. And we're going to be discussing no specific topics, and we're going to have a wide range of views and represented during that discussion, so it should be quite interesting. Following that, we're going to have the Smart Cities Disaster Response Project, the Impetus Project with the EU. We're going to have a presentation on that and what that entails and what that looks like, as well as a topic on data science and COVID response, and also technology and the use of emergency management. Those are all coming up. The next 2 will be with the University of Manchester. It's really a unique series. I highly recommend you join us. Now, today, of course, we're going to be talking about Norway, as previously mentioned, and we are joined by Per Christian Bregg, who's a public security counselor from the embassy, is currently with the Embassy of Norway in Washington, D.C. And I first saw Per when he was giving a presentation to ISG, and I thought this would be absolutely a great presentation and topic to have in our international model series. So he's cordially and thankfully, he's joined us and agreed to present in our webinar series today. So before we get started with that, just turn it over to you, Harold. You're with us today as well. And in case you have anything for opening remarks today.
Thank you, Kyle, and hello, everybody. This is also a special interest to myself as a Norwegian living in Norway. So I really look forward for Per Christian to present Norway. In addition, I like to remind you that we have the annual conference of teams will be virtual this year as well, because traveling is still not so sure. So we decided let's do it as a virtual event and get as good as last year. And all through September, you can submit a short talk. It's what we call practitioners talk, and you can do this by having a full paper. You can do it in PowerPoint. So please submit, and we can fill up the program. And then I think that's it from me, and I really look forward for Per Christian's presentation today.
All right, thank you very much, Harold. And so let's go ahead and just get started. So Per, we'll turn it over to you. And of course, if you'd give us just a quick introduction, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you very much, Kyle, Harold, and not least Teams for having me. Speaking about these things, I mean, obviously, this is something I've been working with or on these subjects for many years. Coming from the Directorate of Civil Protection in Norway, working close with the Ministry of Justice in Norway, but now, of course, in a new position here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, stationed at the embassy here in Washington, D.C. Previous background, the Navy, done a lot of things. Submarines is probably the area where I have very much experience, but I won't bother you with that today. I will take you into how I see the challenge, things we have experienced, and how we work on these matters. Obviously, international models in emergency management, Norway is the headline. But I will go into this in different angles, and I will take you through this in a number of slides. And I do look forward to the discussion at the very end. You probably all know where Norway is, but I just want to give you my very first slide, some facts and figures. Coastline to 25,000 kilometers. If you turn that into miles, it's something like, I think, 15,000 miles plus. And as you see, it's a far-stretched country. And in fact, if you center it around Oslo, turn it upside down, the northern edge, northern point will be further down in Italy, I believe. About 5.3 million people, at least that was the count back in August 2018. Oil and gas production, about 20% of the economy as it stands. And of course, there are other important sectors, hydropower, fish, forest, minerals, to name a few. And of course, also, which we're very proud of, is the state revenues for petroleum are deposited in what is called the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. That's where we are at this starting point. As to the map you see on the right-hand side, of course, Sweden, very close neighbor, Finland, likewise, and up north we have Russia, where we have a common border, something like, I think, 20 kilometers with our great neighbor in the east. I could probably end my presentation here. Zero preparedness is the first line of defense. There are some pictures here showing you events in Norway. And I guess zero preparedness is how you glue all this together, how you make different individuals, organizations, levels in society to come together and be sure they're able to cope with whatever they are up against. Now, in a public debate, budget-wise, in Norway, and I guess also in the countries listening in, public security is very often linked to the police and the armed forces. And I believe they deserve every crony, every dollar they receive. But the discussion must not stop there. If we believe that the police and the armed forces in sum is what ensure public security of the civilian or civil protection, you are on very thin ice. It's about protecting life, health, democracy, the ability to govern, and of course also to protect what we call the vital societal functions. It is also about looking ahead to really ask the correct and precise questions on what we are or could meet at a later stage. What's out there? But that's really a $1 million question. I'm sure if everyone participated, we'll have a long list of different hazards or scenarios that we would have to adopt to. And it's a tricky question to really, and this is not exact science. So whatever we do must be based on the best knowledge that we have. Our process has been really to try to pinpoint what's in this box. It's not the extreme events that you probably couldn't prevent. And if they happen, you will be really challenged to deal with it. It's not about the everyday events, the collisions, the fires, but it's about the serious but imaginable scenarios that will really challenge us in any way that will make, I think, all different areas of society involved to try to deal with it. To bring that to bear, to really sit down with the politicians on every level of society, to bring it out to the people out there, that even if you live in a robust and safe country as Norway is, there will be scenarios, there will be things happening that will challenge our way of living, our daily life. You could probably categorize it like this. We struggle today with climate, and we do know that tomorrow will be even more challenging than today. Terrorism, very difficult to predict probability around it, We had 22nd of July, 2011, 10 years ago in a couple of months. And we do know that the likelihood it will happen again is definitely there. Health, COVID-19 really brought us together in many ways. And you could ask the difficult questions, why weren't we really more prepared for it? But there are other things out there. And some people will argue that COVID-19 was really a wake-up call for much worse scenarios. And are we really there to pick up the lessons learned, do the right things in order to be more prepared? Technology. Our very digitalized societies are up for a challenge. And Norway is really probably one of the more digitized societies in the world. We depend on a working internet and a safe internet. And you could ask the question, are we able to balance how we use the net towards the challenges that we're up against? Global security and territorial integrity. I'm not talking about war, but we have to be prepared for a situation which could be really challenging, could be warlike, could be kinetic in some way. And our geographical position puts this also on the agenda. In 2015, increased migration. How do we deal with it? And how do we deal with it in the context of a climate change? How and what consequences will we see post-Afghanistan and the takeover of Taliban? And of course, hybrid warfare, which I will touch into a bit later. And how do we really relate to risk? Obviously, what you see up in the upper left corner, we do it on holidays, is probably one of the more dangerous things you ever do. Cyber, we read about it, we're confronted with it on a daily basis, and of course, the hurricane checklist, where candy, chocolate, cupcakes, and gelato and wine is really on the checklist. I mean, it's about resilience, it's about meeting these challenges, and it's about understanding threat. And we have knowledge. Every nation I'm sure here today, have loads of knowledge of what's out there, but it's also a question how we use it. This picture, we have a bus stop called the river, and obviously it's flooded. So, but don't blame it on the weather. Blame it on how we use knowledge in the way forward. On a more complex view, is really the understanding of vulnerability and understanding the question of value change. This is down the cyber lane, but dependency, complexity, and vulnerability is really also the issue. And when you go into, I guess, also governmental institutions in Norway on different levels, this question really arises. Do we have a clear understanding of vulnerability and dependency on these issues? And I'm fair to say the question is probably no. Our framework, and I'm sorry these pictures are in Norwegian, is first of all, what is important to safeguard? How do we protect the individual man and woman in Norway? How do we protect the institutions that we are depending on? And secondly, what should we safeguard against? I touched into a few areas, but how do you really take that message and bring it out to bear and make sure that we move in the right direction? We've run through a number of what we call reasonable worst case scenarios, about flooding, Malkins, terrorist attacks, you name it. I think we've been through, I can't remember the exact number of scenarios, but it's a way to really tell people out there and doing it in a logical and methodical way that we are also exposed to these different hazards. In DSB, my former workplace, I mean, this wasn't something we did in close quarters. We invited in everyone who had the responsibility to make this work. I mean, who was there in the energy sector? Who was there from the police, the armed forces? And what are their role and what are their vulnerability if you discuss these different scenarios? And there are some other issues which are even more difficult to really bring to bear. Slow onset disasters new challenges. Obviously, the climate change is there. But what other issues are there that we're not able to pick up on our radar screen that might be growing day by day, and one given day will really challenge us in the way we live and the societies we live in? 14 critical functions have been identified. You probably recognize this list. I guess it could vary from country to country, but these 14 basically are what we said in Norway must be protected. These are really the fundamental functions in our society that makes it possible to live there in a safe way. And to do that, and we're very clear on this, you need all hazard planning and a process. This is not about planning for only climate change or only cyber or only whatever. But what we are very clear about is these functions must not succumb. These functions must be up and running, whatever we're up against. Many kinds of hazards, natural accidents, malicious acts, and it's all about how do we strengthen society in general and make us more resilient as a society. And I'm sure it might be a question popping up in the discussion, but I would say whatever causes the situation might be of lesser importance. We are there to deal with it. Whatever shape, form, size it pops up, we have to be able to deal with it. Now, in the United States, I think the figure is like 85% of the critical infrastructure is on private hands. Well, in Norway also, much of the infrastructure is on private hands. And of course, the responsibility to make these infrastructure able to work, whatever it makes, is the owner's responsibility. They have to secure continuity in these services. The authorities can do a lot by regulating, by providing tools, do audits, make sure the private-public partnership works, incentives, if you will. It all comes down to how do the owners take their role, how do they find their role, and what do they do to make sure these services will run, again, whatever we're up against. And how do you balance this carrot and stick? There's no quick fix. Everyone who's looking for just a turning a page in the book and say, this is solution, this is the solution, he or she will be disappointed. The governments can only use ordinary government tools to instigate change. But what the government has to do, and what I think we've been doing for the last year, is to focus, prioritize, and clarify the expectations that we have to put forward to the private owners. And of course, public-private partnership, to establish these formats for cooperation, including really at the highest levels of government, is what it's all about. Identify ways where we can share information, also classified information when relevant, to bring them into the table, to discuss these issues and really agree on the way forward. And that also includes involvement in exercises. And I think in Norway, we made great steps exactly doing that. In all different kinds of exercises, making sure they are a part of this puzzle. If they're not a part of this puzzle, you will never really understand what you're up against. And I'm sure there will be many failures along the way. Then again, you can plan for whatever. You can really put together all the cleverest people in the country. But there will be situations, there will be days when you wake up and say, gosh, this wasn't really on our drawing board. And that brings me 22nd of July. This horrible Friday, 10 years ago, when Anders Behring Breivik first attacked the Prime Minister's office, the Minister of Justice, and the surrounding ministries, before managing to go out to the island of Utøya, and all in all, killing 77 people, lots of them pure children, and wounded a lot of others. How was that possible in 2011? Why wasn't this on the screen? Well, we had a very thorough report from what's called the 22nd of July Commission, put together by experts, really giving all the opportunities to come up with these answers without any interference from government, really trying to pinpoint where did we fail. And some points really, and you could probably highlight them in these 5. To acknowledge risk, this can't happen here. Norway, safe, robust, and so forth. I mean, terror was something that happened elsewhere. This was a wake-up call in Norway, and it changed our perception of risk. And then again, why weren't decisions implemented preventing Anders Behring Breivik from reaching this point? Why weren't we able to coordinate and interact between the different agencies? Why didn't we have the information and communication technology that was available? Why didn't we use it? But I would say point number 5, maybe the most important. Leadership, willingness, and ability to clarify responsibility. Lots of things have happened in those 10 years. And I would argue that there is a much more professionalism in all levels of society, a more clear commitment by our politicians to deal with this, also asking the difficult questions and accepting difficult and tough answers. Let me take you into one area, which I think is special to Norway, to a couple of the Nordic countries, and I'm sure also to other countries, Switzerland maybe, and also to maybe a couple of the Baltic states. The total defense concept. How small nation try to amalgamate whatever they have our resources to meet the very most difficult scenarios that's out there. It's all about mutual support and cooperation on one side with the armed forces and with civil society throughout the crisis scale, from peace, crisis to war. It's not new. Developed after the Second World War. How do at that time 4 million people meet the situations that could occur throughout the Cold War? To mobilize all the resources and to utilize them in the best possible way. And as I said, throughout the crisis spectrum, it's about you and me, our neighbors on the individual preparedness, how we muster our civilian resources, NGOs, commercial, military, and international. How you bring all these people to bear, different organizations working together on this common threat, if you will. And this is also, I think, an important message. If we manage to build our society more resilient, it's really also a cornerstone in deterrence. I mean, you will think twice using means in societies where you obviously see there is a strong degree of coherence and resilience. And total defense and the way we work and how this has been redefined throughout the last years is important steps down that path. And the armed forces today in Norway really needs what you see here on this list. We don't have hospitals designed for the armed forces. We use our hospitals where it is. Same goes for transportation. The road systems is there for the civilian and the armed forces. Oil, food, electricity. How do you make sure these resources are available for the armed forces when needed? And I think this goes without saying. In Norway and other countries, this interdependency between a functioning civil society and the overall capability of the armed forces is strong. The armed forces won't be able to do, well, it will be very limited if you aren't able to build this bridge and make sure that this cooperation is there and it works. And that goes for NATO as well. In fact, 90% of all military transportation is performed by civilian contractors. Satellite traffic, host nation support. So whoever thinks and believes that in these very worst kind scenarios, the armed forces will be running their whatever they do without the support from the civilian side, I think will be very, very disappointed. I don't think it will work at all. We in Norway have a crisis response system closely linked to NATO. I mean, if efforts and decisions are taken in NATO, it's really down to both the military side and the civilian side. On a very detailed level, we're able to balance whatever we put in force on the civilian as well as the military side. It's important, we exercise it and we see it works, all the way down to the municipalities. And again, of course, NATO has also picked up on this. After the NATO summit in 2016, the necessity to look on civilian preparedness was highlighted. And of course, the list here you see here, 7 baseline requirements, also really put it forward to nations that you have to be prepared and you have to have more agility and more resilience on these 7 areas. And they mirrors the 14 critical I showed you a bit previously in my presentation. It's about energy, it's about water, it's about communication, transportation. It's about the cooperation between the civilian and the military side. This picture, in many ways, shows you what it's all about. There are people in uniform, different kinds of uniform. They know each other, they trust each other, they understand each other's needs and how to cooperate. They do it in peacetime, they do it in crisis, and if ever required, they will do it in wartime. It's host nation support. What do they need? I touched into it already, but it's a lot of stuff. And it's stuff normally you'll find on the civilian side and not within the armed forces. This is also a picture about host nation support. It's more on a daily basis. Directorate for Civil Protection, where I came from, is the point of contact for EU, NATO, ERDCC, and OSCE. Last week, there was a request for assistance from Haiti being coordinated in Brussels, put forward to the different, Norway is not a member of EU, but we are a member of the emergency crisis system. And we forwarded and we sent down a medical team to support Haiti and to build up a hospital down there for a period of time. This is also what it's about. But then again, how we do it, we coordinate with the armed forces, we coordinate it with all the entities entering into the system of total defense, and we make sure we're able to go whenever needed and where needed. Current workflow, and again, in the aftermath of 22nd of July, we report to our parliament, where are we? Are we more resilient today than we were yesterday? Where are really the challenges and how do we move forward? NATO again, and we report to NATO on the assessments of these 7 baselines. And of course, it's a measures to reduce vulnerability and improve capability, which is all about. But it's about money. Of course, and it's about this. I mean, how much damage would you accept in a flood before you start to really mitigate and to say we have to be better prepared and accept the fact that it costs more to fix than to be better prepared next time. That leads me into a discussion on budgets and political priorities, which I'll be very careful to enter into. Regarding every discussion, if you should change your sewer system compared to building a new kindergarten, it's tricky to do this also on the local level. And it's also a question about the ability for people to say, and the willingness for people to say, this will probably not happen on my watch. They might be right, but history will also tell us that many times they've been very wrong. It's also about this, personal emergency preparedness. Time back, we sent out a brochure to every household in Norway saying you are a part of the Norwegian preparedness system. And you have to be able, within a time frame of 48 hours, to look after your family. We won't be around. There will be no ambulance, no firefighters, no police next door able to help you. So for 48 hours, you have to look after your household to the best of your ability, and you have to do some storage of goods to do so. How was that received? Well, we had phone calls saying, what do you know that we don't know? What is the government hiding since you're coming out with this advice? And then again, were lots of people saying, this is great. We need to be prepared. We need to be better prepared than we are today. There might be a generation gap there from people who really experienced maybe the old war, the old Cold War, if you will, and a new generation which listen to the podcast and do whatever they do, but also need this wake-up call that one day the water might be not be coming out of your tap, your next door shop will not receiving the goods they normally do, and you have to live under safe conditions, even in those cases. This picture, it says Krigslys and Fredslys, it's a war and peace light, if you will. I found it in a Norwegian air raid shelter. We still have a couple of those. But it really depicts the way we approached this issue earlier. It was a black and white thing. There was nothing in between. It was either this or that. And that's the situation we were up against. But then again, today, there is a blur between state security and societal safety, or public security, if you will, this non-kinetic warfare or hybrid warfare, if you like. The picture you see there, I took it on the Jersey side during the Hurricane Sandy. And obviously, you see Manhattan on the other side darkened. Obviously, this was the weather. But there are scenarios out there, of course, that this also could be an intended action for some kind of adversary out there. A couple of years ago, 2015, we had about 5,000 refugees arriving at the northern border from Russia on bicycles during wintertime. I'll be very careful to define this as some kind of a hybrid action. But obviously, they had the permission to pass, and it really challenges our northern border, and it made a really crisis on how to deal with this issue. Our neighbor in the east again. This is from, I think, 2018 during an exercise, and we had GPS jamming, really putting strain on our civilian air traffic, on search and rescue and so forth. And as you see, even if it's in Norwegian, you see it was very centered around the time of the NATO exercise Trident Juncture. It talks about vulnerability on areas we might not be prepared as it is today. Disinformation. Monday this week, Norway had the election, national election. If we at any way were beaten by anyone on the disinformation side, it hasn't been made public, but it's there. And how do you, in a modern society, meet this challenge? How do you go down the path to build what we call cognitive resilience? Telling people you have to have a second opinion. You have to be more precise in what you write. You mustn't believe whatever you read on these different medias. And how can you do it being politically correct, which I know for many nations is really a struggle. But we have to do it in order to meet the challenges ahead. And it's about trust. Trust, I'm sure, it's really a high value commodity. And I think if you look to Nordic countries, I'll be very careful to include other countries. There's a high degree of trust, both vertically, to your next door neighbor, to your colleague at work, but also vertically, to your government, to the people in your municipality. And that trust isn't something you build up during a day or two. It's built on traditions over years. And of course, it's also an advantage when you meet challenges into the future, and not least also the COVID-19. This picture, 12th of March, 2020, you have the Prime Minister sitting number 2, and yours truly on number 5, really taking in what this means for the country and what action should we take on a starting position. The numbers, total cases around 177,000, deaths around 827, and vaccine, 2 doses, around 65. The full and thorough learning about this is still to come. As a nation, definitely we had COVID on the radar screen, not COVID, but pandemic on the radar screen, but still it surprised us. It really came as a shock. We were not prepared on the PPE. We were not prepared really to come together and say, what does this mean? We really looked at that as a health issue, but then of course, all sectors of society were involved eventually. And I'm sure there will be outcome here on the other end. We'll hear more about this story. All in all, however, I think Norway, under our leadership of Prime Minister Solberg here, did a good job taking us where we are today. A couple of more slides before I'm finished. I've been touching into the total defense. Total defense is also about individuals in uniform, in civilian. This picture taken from the NATO headquarters a couple of years ago really shows you all our military leaders with all the civilian leaders and even some politicians. People who know each other on first name, people willing and able to give each other a phone call to say, what can I do to support you in this situation? Building trust, building coherence, and understanding what this is all about. That's total defense. Pitfalls, there are many. And I'm sure the future will tell us things we haven't really thought about, prepared, and really came as a shock. But there are 5 bullet points where I think sums up that we have to be aware of. Imagination. Really to broaden our scope when you think about these things. What is out there which we haven't really talked about? Are we really in somehow hindered to think about things which might be even more serious than we haven't touched upon? It's about initiative. I see something that's coming. I want to press that red button, and I'm going to do it in the right way and early enough to deal with it. Are we able to coordinate? Are we able to take that phone call, make sure that the right entities are involved all the way? Are we able to communicate in the right way about what we're up against and how we're going to deal with it? And lastly, but definitely not least, the failure of learning. Obviously, after each incident, 22nd of July, floods, and I'm sure also COVID, there is a window of opportunity to deal with the issues. But we all know that the politicians are busy and the scenarios change from day to day, and those windows eventually close. So how we make sure learning and making this part of our culture is a driving factor moving forward. My last picture is you're truly hugging a submarine. And you can wonder why I do that. It's my first submarine as a previous CEO. It's really saying hello to an old friend. But it's also a reminder that this old friend is now in a museum, which probably puts it in a perspective that we're all getting older. If we're getting wiser, I don't know, but at least we bring some experience to the table. Thank you very much. Again, thanks to the team, thanks to Carl, thanks to Harald. I do look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Really interesting. So this is the actual submarine that you were on, right?
Yes, sir. That's the first one.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. So we do have a few questions for you, Barry. So we'll just go ahead and get started with those. And I think we'll be able to work through most of them in the next few minutes. So the first question is, Norway has clearly learned to integrate resilience into their society. What is your perspective on how the lessons Norway has learned apply to larger nations, such as in the US?
That's a very interesting question. I think there are parallels. We're up against the same things. But of course, the scope, the size is different. And I think, in fact, if you turn that around, I think Norway had a lot to learn from the United States. If you look at how you deal with wildfires out of control, if you look at how you mass evacuate people during crisis, these are areas where we lack experience and knowledge. You are experts on these areas, and we have to look into it. Then again, I think we have experience more like a laboratory. Huh? We're dealing with these issues. And I think the issue of, let's say, trust, how you work on an issue of cognitive resilience, how you do that in a way to bring people with you and not against you, and without crossing a threshold in what is deemed to be politically incorrect. So yes, I believe also within the total defense area, on how you bring people together, whatever uniform or not the uniform, on how you build these areas where people trust each other, cooperate, and really come together in the best possible way. The areas are there to be picked, Then again, we have to also learn from you in a larger scale.
Okay, thanks. So two sort of questions coming out, a two-part question. Let me just say that. So in the US, there's the use of the incident command system. And while Britain uses this gold, silver, and bronze methodology, what does Norway use for their incident command system?
There are parallels. They don't have the bronze, silver, and gold system, but this is in fact, and it's a good question. I'm going up to the US Fire Academy next week, and this is one of the questions I'm going to bring with me to learn how you have done it. You'll find different systems in Norway, sadly to say. But what we have, and I think that's quite unique, at least well, not in the Nordic countries, we have one system for communication. We have one digitalized emergency communication system, making all the emergency, fire, rescue, police, armed forces are able to communicate on the same systems. So everything is there. The whole system, the unified command system. I think we have to go a couple of rounds to pick up your lessons to be better on the whole thing. Actually, we see it works. Some areas this is up and running, but it's not totally integrated that we see it.
Okay. All right. So the next question is. So no, we answered that one. Sorry. Let me move on. Okay. Got to scroll down. All right. So what is Norway's process for conducting its preparedness assessments? So for example, the US FEMA uses THERA and SPR at the state and regional level. What informs everything else? So that's not a question. Which informs everything else in the US? How does Norway conduct these assessments?
Well, you have all the municipalities, and there is a lot of municipalities in Norway. You have the county governors who will actually go into every municipality and check off what is regulated in law and where they are on their preparedness. This is on the local and the regional level. DSB, and that's kind of a strange story, has also the authority to run audits in the ministries. So supported by our lead minister, DOJ, we are authorized to go into different government agencies and ministries and audit where are they on the preparedness track. There will be written reports. There will go reports to the Prime Minister's office. And I would say in the aftermath of the 22nd of July, this is really high on the political agenda. You don't want those reports to have too many bad marks. It will obviously be a tough for the actual ministry involved. There is also, of course, the self-reporting system. We are in the process now of reporting our preparedness to NATO. I think it's something like 20,000 questions being ticked off. It's done, of course, well, it's not objective, it's subjective assessments on where we are. But this, together with the different audits, this together with very open societies, when things happen, there will be media pressure on every community, on every ministry. Where are you? Why did that happen? And why didn't you manage it better than you did? It's also a way to move forward.
Mm-hmm. So you have a bit of a sort of a national framework for your preparedness assessments, but you've also integrated the NATO sort of preparedness baseline assessments that go along with that as well.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay. And so next question is, while we discuss the response, interagency collaboration, we very seldom share best continuity of operations plans and its best practices across the world. We are currently enduring severe weather conditions across the globe and certainly would benefit from a working group that directly addresses continuity of operations based on the event being addressed. To your knowledge, is there any current international working group that can address some of these functional gaps?
Well, I think you find a very solid footprint within the work on disaster risk reduction and the United Nations. Obviously, they are looking at scenarios much worse than we touched into so far. But it's also about bringing knowledge from different countries into bear and how this can be really utilized in other geographical spots. I think that's an important part. Of course, within organizations as EU and also to a certain degree NATO, there is an exchange of information. We try to, the reports we write, we try to make them also in English. A good example is the example, I mean, back in March in 2019, we had a very close catastrophe outside our shores with a cruise ship, Viking Sky. And to make this, I mean, it's now in written in English. To make this available for different nations is also a way to move forward. But I think you're touching into an area where there is an area for really to do things better. I think in a daily way, we are busy. We work our way through the different things. We try to evaluate the best as we can. But maybe we don't really have the gene saying that this report, this knowledge should be made available for other nations because there is a common footprint here, and this might well be something they're going to meet at a later stage.
Mm-hmm. I think to add to that to a certain extent, and if you already sort of touched on it, is that this sort of supranational sort of level with the UN, what the work the EU is doing in terms of continuity operations, continuity of government, what NATO is doing in terms of those aspects as well. There are some working groups that are out there. There are some planning committees. There are some other, planning groups that are involved. But I think it's also sort of difficult, and Perry, you can also give your perspective on this. But I think it's also difficult to release really detailed information because one, it can be sensitive, and two, it's really not fit for everybody. So not, as we've learned mostly because of this process as well, as far as the webinar series, everybody is sort of different in their approach, right? So giving detailed plans, some may help some people, but often doesn't apply. If we try to use the FEMA model in other smaller nations, as far as JFOs and things like that, it doesn't really work as well. So there's sort of some caveats to releasing this sort of international information to the extent of, you release enough to be helpful to people, but sometimes there are conditions to where, the US has a unique environment about things and systems and structures, legal issues as well, which may not fit everybody, for example.
I totally agree, Carl. And one size doesn't fit all. I mean, geographical, there are political, there are economical constraints all over the place. And whatever you learn might not be really the issue in place X or Y.
And so next question is, what is the national institutional mechanism for addressing the policy formulation, emergency preparedness and response system in Norway? Which ministries are part of that system? So you've mentioned, of course, your total defense forum and other aspects, but what sort of ministries are involved in the, addressing the policy formulation, emergency preparedness and response?
Well, this is really cooperation between, I would say, almost all ministries, but some ministries obviously have a much precise, clear and central role. Coming to the very tough, when your country is really threatened by some foreign adversary, of course, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be very much in the leading seat, supported by the Ministry of Justice. But in all, in peacetime crisis, on the civilian side is the Ministry of Justice, who is the lead sponsor, if you will, the leader of these things. Underneath the Ministry of Justice, you'll find the police, you'll find the security service, you'll find DSP, you'll find the National Security Authority, all these entities basically working on a daily basis. And through DSP, you have down to all the municipalities in the countries. But of course, these different ministries, they come together and they formulate the policy. There will be white papers written, but I can assure you that not that one single white paper will be written without every ministry being involved in the quality to check it, to make sure that their roles and responsibilities are part of it. And it's a government that holds, that really puts it forward. So it's a procedure that gathers all these different entities. And it's a whole of government approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the next question is, from your perspective, how much is your system similar of emergency management with Sweden or Finland? In some of your slides, you showed exactly how close you were, especially in terms of like the GPS jamming and things like that. And even, maybe Denmark, for example, just in cross-border cooperation and crisis management point of view.
It's very close. Obviously, you saw our border with Sweden. They had large forest fires back in 2018. We send fire trucks crossing the border. There is no red tape. We are on the same communication system. In fact, they have their system, we have ours, and they're able to communicate together. Same goes for the fence. I think on the fence side also, I wouldn't dare to go into the area, but there are NORDEFCO and Nordic Defense Cooperation, which is there. We really try to struggle to make aware of our plans to the degree. We participate in each other exercises, also exercises involving the armed forces. We have a very close cooperation within the umbrella called the Haga umbrella, where we also together with Denmark, Sweden, and to an extent also Finland, try to come up with solutions on how to deal with these issues and doing it together. We have, with the exception of Finland, a common language, so it's easy, more or less common language, so it's easy to communicate. We have a historical track which brings us many years back, where Norway, in fact, was a part of Sweden, part of Denmark, and so forth. So there's historical footprints also making this work. And of course, close friends, of course, the Swedes not being a member of NATO, with Norway not being a member of EU, there are different international bindings that makes things possible and not possible in different aspects.
So there's a couple of questions here that are quite interesting, and we just got just a few minutes left. And I'll take a question from the chat, which is, as the military increasingly focus on phase 0 operations, in your view, what are the implications for the traditional boundaries between government sectors? And I think this is a great question because you also highlighted that in your total defense concept, the cooperation between public and private sector, and also the fact that, most of, the vast majority of infrastructure is also owned by the private sector, and I think almost most nations, right? So how do you see these, the implications for traditional boundaries between the government sectors?
I would like to applaud what the armed forces has done. A number of contracts are already in place, really trying to cut down on the red tape if it really comes to really have to the difficult situations. Making sure that they can get whatever they need on a very short notice, because there will be political processes that has to go there, the machinery. And we do know that that will take some time. That's the way democracies work. And to be prepared and to take those steps, enabling them to deal with the first day, the first week, whatever, I think is an important part of our preparedness. We have a new government coming in. And of course, it will be exciting also to see their priorities on how this is going to be. But I think really this total defense is so rooted in Norwegian traditions. That's it. It's there to stay. But there will be situations, of course, where response time will be the key issue, and where the authority to our defense, to our chief of defense, will be put to a test. But then again, I'm pretty sure the communication channels is there. There is an openness, there's a willingness, and there's an understanding, also in the political environment, what this is all about. So I'm optimistic that this will also work in times of tension, and even if some kind of an armed conflict.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the last question we have for you is, so you mentioned, of course, information, disinformation, the cognitive warfare that we sort of have going on these days. How does Norway control misinformation and disinformation through things like social media?
Well, I think it's important to say that the word control here will be very political, unwise. We don't control anything. I mean, obviously, there will be an interest what's written on the social media. And I'm sure there are people looking into what is written to see what can we pick up that we have to be prepared to deal with. But then again, Norway is a very open society, very open. You could read more stuff in Norwegian newspapers and going into different agencies than you could maybe in different nations. So that's, again, the issue of trust. It's about really making people aware of that what you read might be wrong. What you read might be directed by others, trying to really mingle with your opinions in a certain direction. And to make that point on the early level in schools, youngsters sitting on the internet, communicating, whoever, but also with the normal he or she sitting on the internet. And we can manage that. That is resilience. That's an important part. And that will also make it this issue of deterrence. Whoever wants to come in and fuss with us as a society, well, there will be some really doors that will have to struggle to open.
Okay, great. All right, so we're hitting at just about an hour. So I just want to say, of course, we've gone through the questions, and just a quick reminder about professional development opportunities that are coming up, of course. As you know, there's the TQC, TQAC, and TQC qualification, of course, from the International Merchant Management Society is, of course, a certification for individual merchant managers with a nationally recognized professional certification or other individuals with documented competence and experience, practical or academic in international emergency management, emergency and disaster management. First, I'll just say congratulations to Vinod, who's here with us today, who recently passed his exams. Congratulations, Vinod. And of course, there's the TQAC, which is really certifies people that maybe not have as much experience as well. So find out more information there as teams.info and find out more information about the qualification and certifications available from Teams. And of course, when Norway is talking about total defense concept and NATO crisis management, we also at CBI, we teach with the University of California, the NATO crisis management disaster response course, delivered by CBI in partnership with the NATO CMDR COE. And completing that course, you'll get 2 certificates through UCI for professional development, as well as a NATO certificate itself from the COE. Enrollment is now open and starts in next week, actually. So go ahead and take a look there in case you are interested. And I think that's it from my side. Harold, any closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I am very pleased to listen to Per Christen today about Norway, and he added to the other good presentation we had. And we have a good constituency that follow us all the time, many questions. And again, I will come back to, we have now built up a very good database of the different systems around the world. And I hope some will take this up and look at the differences. And maybe this could be good at the university or many universities for looking into this more, see the differences, how can we learn from each other. So university people pick up this. The database is free and open. We have all the presentations there. That's my hope that someone will do that. Thank you, and thank you all.
Okay, thanks. Again, thanks, Per. Thanks for joining us, and wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.